Hello, Gooner Network. How are we doing on this fine Thursday evening? Coming to you guys about to break down and review the first 3 episodes of All or Nothing, the Arsenal edition that just dropped today. I'm really excited. I just finished the first 3 episodes and they're good. They're a little bit of what you expect, a little bit cookie cutter, as were the other All or Nothing series, but it's a good look in on what the players and the staff actually think of Mikel Arteta, how he operates with the club, the role that Josh Kroenke plays in the club. I thought that was an interesting surprise, and getting a chance to see him actually speak about Arteta and about the club, and it was really an insightful process, actually, the first 3 episodes, if it was a little bit cookie cutter, if it was a lot of things that we already knew, if you follow the club closely. Of course, I am really excited. I just got the new Arsenal away kit. I have to say, this is probably the sexiest kit that I have ever seen in my, at least in the recent years since we've partnered with Adidas as our kit sponsor. This is easily the sexiest kit that I've ever worn, at least, and it feels nice. The material is quality. It fits the body well. This black and gold is just intimidating. It's just super badass. So yeah, I'm absolutely in love with it. I'm so excited for the season to start. We get it in 2 days. Crystal Palace on a Friday night. I cannot wait. There's a bunch of things going on, popping off about Arsenal right now. The new kits are getting delivered. The All or Nothing series coming out, and then of course we open the season with the away trip to Selhurst Park. So without any further ado, guys, let's get into it. Let's take a look at the first 3 episodes of All or Nothing Arsenal edition. So episode 1 covers from the opening match of Brentford to Norwich, to the Norwich match at the Emirates. So episode 1 covers from Brentford to Norwich, so the first 4 matches of the season, and as we all know and would like to forget, a lot happened in those first 4 weeks last year. So kind of to give a reference, the season, of course, had an early start because we were following up. We had to cram in a lot of football that had been rescheduled, the Euros, so to speak, as well as the Olympics, a lot of football that had been rescheduled because of the COVID pandemic. So there wasn't really much of a preseason. Everything was kind of crammed together, and it was very hectic and chaotic at the start. So I think the first episode, it really kind of focused on the matches, yes, but also there were 3 people that I think the first episode really focused on, and those 3 people are Bukayo Saka, Mikel Arteta, and Josh Kroenke, which was a welcome surprise to actually hear him speak, because I don't think he's ever done any public presentation or interview or anything on Arsenal and what it's like to be the director of Arsenal Football Club. So it was interesting to hear him speak. I want to start talking about Bukayo Saka, because he was a really central part of the first episode. They, of course, talked about the Euros. They even showed the final penalty kick, some replay footage of the final penalty kick that Gianluigi Donnarumma managed to save. They then gave some clips of Bukayo being consoled afterwards by Gareth Southgate, by the other English players, and they spoke about the racial abuse that he faced as a 19-year-old, the racial abuse that he faced following this saved penalty kick. And I thought it was a really good insight, a really good look at what a player like that undergoes, at how they're treated by the rest of the club, by his teammates, by other supporters. They showed a lot of the work, like some of the letters and notes that kids from the local area had drawn and written to Bukayo Saka, and I thought that was a really nice touch, because I don't even understand what it's like to be racially abused, let alone on that scale, to be mass abused like that over the internet. I can't even begin to imagine the sort of frustration and anger and hate that Saka must have felt and experienced, and I can't even begin to fathom it. So I think this show has done a good job of propping up Bukayo Saka as a young superstar, as a role model, as a future role model, and as one right now, and showing the kind of character and person that he is. It was really, really well done in that regard. I am glad they managed to bring back Thierry Henry. They got an interview or two of Thierry Henry, and they have thrown in so far a couple of interesting tidbits and they've done some good job with the editing and splicing and putting in. And one of the things that Thierry Henry said that they brought up when they were talking about Bukayo Saka at the Euros is he quoted this: "When you step on the field, no one cares you're a human being." And I think that like we all forget that. We have all lashed out or said horrible things about a player because they've made a mistake or something, and we just forget that they're human beings as well. Most of them are probably good people, you know. I mean, you have your Joey Bartons of the world, you have your John Terrys and whatnot, but most of them are Bukayo Sakas. Most of them are good players, good people. And I think it's important that we collectively as fans try to do better in terms of remembering that they're people and remembering it's just a game, and that our words carry weight, and the way that we treat people is important, and the atmosphere that we harbor and the culture that we harbor around the club is really, really important. And I think this quote from Thierry Henry it's just really important. Saka also made a comment speaking with Emile Smith-Rowe and Balogun. While Fuller and Balogun, they were sitting down having lunch at London Colney, and he made this interesting remark on how he was sharing an experience of where he had his hoodie up and his mask on, and he went to go to a restaurant, and then when he picked up his food and was getting ready to leave, the entire wait staff were all lined up, excited and waiting to meet him, wanting to get pictures and stuff. So he's talking about the sort of part of the game that no one really talks about when you're a superstar is the celebrity status, and how you can't really go anywhere without being recognized. And remember, at this time, he was 19 years old. He's only 20 now. He's a kid. He's a kid, man. He's just finished his A-levels. He's just graduated the equivalent of high school, man. He's a youngster through and through. And so I thought that this was a really interesting tidbit. We then went from the show focused on Arteta and the pressure that he was under for a little while. It focused on Saka for a little while, and then we got into the Brentford game. We all know how that went. 2-0 to Brentford away. You know, it kind of had Brentford victory written all over it from the beginning. Lacazette and Aubameyang both out with COVID. Brentford newly promoted, brand new stadium that they hadn't gotten to play in yet because fans had been restricted from COVID. So they were finally getting to play in their new stadium. It was brand new, under the lights, first time in the Premier League, first time in the top division since 1900 or something like that. So it kind of had Brentford victory written all over it. Not too surprised. And the show kind of moved quickly through that, and then it went and gave Josh Kroenke a little bit of the limelight, and it meant, they touched on the decision to join and then leave the Super League in April or May of 2021. Decision that was widely renounced, widely criticized from pretty much every football fan everywhere. None of us were in support of it. And they talked about then, Josh spoke about how important it is to regain the trust, how he knows he has to regain the trust of the fans and rebuild that trust. He made an interesting comment that he said, quote, "My family just took control in 2018. Talking about taking control of Arsenal, that was when they became the majority shareholders. When they bought out, I forget who they bought the rest of the shares and bought out. I forget the businessman's name, who they bought out from. However, and I think, a lot of us think of the Kroenkes as having owned Arsenal since 2006, since 2004. That's not really the case in their eyes. I think that they more see that they have just now, in the past couple of years, in 2018, finished buying out Arsenal, that they are now the sole owners and sole decision makers. I think that's the way that they see it. And maybe there's truth to that, maybe not. Maybe they're reflecting some of the poor decisions and restrictions that were made upon Wenger during the second half of his reign at the Emirates. Maybe that's, a tactic to a PR tactic to deflect responsibility. I don't know. I'm trying to throw out all the options. I think if that is true, that they are only now becoming the decision makers, I think that bodes well for Arsenal's future. But I think it's just as equally likely that it's a PR tactic from Josh there. He does talk about, he mentions to Saka how he texted him after the Euros, and I think that's interesting that the director is in direct contact with some of the players. I think that's really just an interesting note to see that he texted Saka condolences and something along the lines of like, keep your head up after that penalty miss at the Euros. So I think that's just an interesting thing to note, that the director does have direct lines of contact with these players, that he doesn't have to go through, or is not self-imposed to go through Mikel Arteta or Edu, or that he's open to reaching out to these players. I think that's a good sign. I think that sort of communication should be there between owners and between the players, but that's my own personal opinion. They then mention how the ownership approved, of course, last summer's massive spend, the likes of Nuno Tavares, the likes of Ben White, the likes of Takehiro Tomiyasu, Aaron Ramsdale, and then, of course, Albert Sambi Lakanga and Martin Odegaard. And they talk about how they made it seem as if the Crankies were greenlighting this spending, and there was a brief moment where Vinay and Edu and Josh were all in a room breaking down tactically the squad and where they needed to rebuild and continue to improve. They focused a lot on the right back position. We had like 4 names in that depth position at the start of last summer, which I find that interesting, that's what they decided to focus on. But just a little note. They then went into the Chelsea preparation and signing of Aaron Ramsdale, of course, from Bournemouth, who were freshly relegated. They mentioned that how he'd been relegated in back-to-back seasons, and then they went on to, again, list the abuse that the player has received from Twitter and that the club has received. And I just thought that was, again, really disgusting, and I hope that as fans we can try and remember these are real people, too. And he talks about how he doesn't go on social media at all, how he's turned off all of his social media notifications and whatnot. They showed a little bit of KSI speaking. They got KSI to do an interview at the Chelsea match, which I thought was interesting. For those of you who don't know, KSI is a famous YouTuber, a famous streamer, or at least that was how he kind of built his notoriety. He is an Arsenal fan, Arsenal supporter, and he originally got big because he was doing FIFA Ultimate Team videos, and now he does all sorts of things. I think he recently had a boxing match with like Logan Paul or Jake Paul. I don't know, I get the two confused. He's all over the place now, but they managed to bring him in for an interview, and he was very negative about the club, and I think this was at a time when a lot of people were very negative about the club. I think the atmosphere has shifted, but it's interesting to note these high profile, these people with, weighted voices, and the way that they speak about the club. I think that's just an interesting examination. We then went into after the City match. We saw a conversation that Josh and Mikel had over lunch in London Colney, and one of the things that Josh says to Mikel Arteta is, the only guys you can trust are the ones in the room with you. I have your back. Just think it's interesting to note, again, Josh's support of Mikel Arteta. We know that the Crankies Arteta has the Crankies' full backing. We know that after our 14-17 winless in a row or whatever it was 2 years ago. We know that after the way Arteta was supported following the 3 losses to open the campaign last year. And we know that because he extended his contract last year after we secured Europa League football. So we know that the Crankies have support, and it's just interesting to see this verbalized. We then went into Norwich preparations in the Norwich game. I think something interesting to note here was all the players talking about the details that Mikel Arteta takes in terms of his approach. All of the hidden things and the ways in which other coaches don't really hold up. You know, they got Granit Xhaka, who's been around the block. He's been at Mönchengladbach. He's been in Switzerland. He's, you know, a player with a little bit of status, with a little bit of stature to him. You know, he played under Wenger, played under Emery. And he talks about how Mikel Arteta takes a different approach than any coach that he's ever worked with. And I just find that absolutely fascinating, looking at that. And the approach that Mikel Arteta comes, he does seem to be a very detail-oriented guy, but I don't think that distracts him from the bigger picture, which is important to have that balance when it comes to team building and squad building. They, of course, showed the pre-match talk that was released prior to the release of the series, the pre-match talk before Norwich, where Mikel Arteta talks about high-performance teams. He talks about hospital teams, teams in the ER, in the emergency room. He talks about then why he is a coach, why that week between Manchester City and Norwich was the best week of his footballing career. He gave that speech, and we got to see that speech, and I thought that was it's interesting to be in the dressing room for these discussions. I really like, that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to finish this documentary and this docuseries, is because those are the sorts of things, like, we all say that classic phrase, I want to be a fly on the wall in that room, and I think we finally get the chance with this, and it's well done. It's interesting to see. The last little bit that I want to talk about from episode 1 was just Ramsdale's family. His dad seems to be a bit of a character, kind of a hothead all over the place. A lot of cussing thrown around, a lot of that says the F word quite a lot, which is just a nice little. It's just kind of funny to see that, and they were, of course, very excited. Ramsdale mentions how his parents have missed 2 games outside of COVID in the last 4 years, so they're a very dedicated family. They follow him, they go everywhere with him, so I thought that was just nice to see, and it really humanizes the players really well, in my opinion. So episode 2, guys, was a lot shorter. It only focused on Burnley and Tottenham, and to be honest, it was entirely about Tottenham. The Burnley match was glossed over. It was just the beginning. It was like 2 minutes, and they pretty much just showed Ødegaard's free kick that he scored, and that was about it. Then they moved straight on to Tottenham in the preparation for the North London derby. They did a really interesting scene of Aubameyang with his barber getting his haircut in his home. They showed his kids. It was really cute, and the whole time Auba is talking about his grandfather. He's talking about why he gets the star shaved into his head, into his haircut, before the North London derby, and I thought it was a really interesting story. So basically, Auba gets this star shaved into his head because in 2016, when he first signed for the club, his grandfather passed away just before the North London derby, and then Auba got the star cut into his hair for him because his grandfather is, his star. And then he went out and he scored 2 goals, and so ever since then he has gotten the star shaved into his head because it's for his grandfather. And I thought that was a really interesting story, a good look into Auba and into things that motivates him. I think we know the family is a big factor in his life. He's talked about his dad, he's talked about his wife and his kids. Of course, he had that incident with Toni Kroos on Twitter a few years ago where Toni Kroos said that he wasn't a role model because of his celebrations and stuff. So we know that family is important to him, and I think this was a nice touch. Again, humanizing these players, showing us aspects into their personal lives, and they did that with Tierney as well in episode 3. I thought it was really cool, and we'll get into that in a second. They for the North London derby, the majority of this episode focused on Emile Smith-Rowe and Bukayo Saka, and I thought this was really cool. It showed us a lot about Emile Smith-Rowe and about his personality and about what Arteta thinks of him. And Arteta gives there's an interview where Arteta is asked about Emile Smith-Rowe and what his first impression of is, and he talks about how he's a shy boy, he's quiet, he seems a little bit insecure, and he knows that the talent is there. Arteta knows the talent is there. It's about bringing the confidence and the energy out of Emile Smith-Rowe, about his character. And so he actually tells him when he sent him on loan 2 years ago, he tells him The only thing that I'm interested in is what other people say about you, is how they say you act, how they say you carry yourself. I'm not even going to watch your games. So I think that's an important thing to note, is that with Emile Smith-Rowe, we know the talent is there. It's a mental aspect that Arteta is looking for. It's an emotional aspect that Arteta is looking for in him to really bring his game to the next level. I just find that fascinating to learn more about these players and about their personalities. There's a really interesting quote that Thierry Henry says, where he says the players that he identifies with the most at Arsenal right now are Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe, because they, quote, have Arsenal Football Club written on their foreheads. And I just think that's so cool to see. Like, we all supporters love both these players, and it's just so cool to see legends talking about their commitment to the club and about how much they love the club, and hearing these players talk about how much they love the club. It just makes you excited. It just brings that little kid out of you, doesn't it? How, hearing this and seeing, like, actually getting to get behind the scenes a little bit and see how these players interact with each other and how they really feel about the club and feel about each other. It's just cool stuff to see. This is one of the reasons I'm really excited for this documentary, of course. I thought an interesting thing to note was Albert Stuvenberg was the one breaking down film with Emile Smith-Rowe. We know that he's one of the assistants, and I'm not sure whether he's always the one who breaks down the film with the players, but it's interesting to note that he specifically was the one doing it. It wasn't another coach, like, for example, Carlos Cuesta, who we also talked about, who was also touched upon in this episode, or Mikel Arteta himself. It's Stuvenberg who's the one breaking down the film with ESR. And there's actually a really interesting moment where he asks Emile Smith-Rowe a question, and Emile Smith-Rowe kind of mutters it. He kind of like he's talking to himself a little bit, and Stuvenberg goes, "Speak up, louder," and that encourages, Emile Smith-Rowe kind of like chuckles at it and then speaks from his chest about it. So I just think it's interesting to see that the coaching staff is focusing on bringing out these players, on developing them, not only as players and on the pitch, but as men, as young men, as role models and stuff. I like that. I think it's interesting things to see. I mentioned a few moments ago Carlos Cuesta, and I think this is an interesting character. He's listed as an individual development coach, does a lot of tactical and technical coaching for the players. So he's working one-on-one with players is basically what his role is. He's a one-on-one coach. He's a young guy. He's 26 now. He's 25 during the course of last campaign, of course. And I think he's a really interesting character in Mikel Arteta's coaching staff. So he, at 18, joined Atletico Madrid's coaching staff. So working under Diego Simeone, he was one of the best coaches in the game. And at the same time was getting his education in Porto. From there, he then moved to Juve when he was 22. And while at Juve, he sent Man City a technical analysis report on Manchester City. And because of that, they invited him to come and meet with them and have a visit at City's training grounds. And I thought that's really interesting. And while he was there, he meets Mikel Arteta, and they have a conversation. Apparently they hit it off. And then when Arteta won the FA Cup in his first 6 months in charge, he then immediately, one of the first people that he went out and hired was Carlos Cuesta. So I just think that's really interesting. He speaks 6 languages or something like that, like French, Spanish, Catalan, Portuguese, and Italian. One more, English. Yeah. So he's a polyglot like Mikel Arteta. So I just think that's interesting to note. And there's later in episode 3, Nuno Tavares talks about how he enjoys speaking with Cuesta and how he enjoys working with him. So clearly he gets something out of these players. So I just think it's cool to see these young coaches and this next generation of coaches and how they interact with the players and what they bring to the dressing room and the coaching staff. Before we actually get into the North London derby, which the documentary doesn't really touch on too much. It just shows the game and then the dressing room afterwards. But an interesting note is that Arteta gives 2 speeches before games. He gives one about an hour before kickoff, and then he gives one right before kickoff. So for the North London derby, for the game against Tottenham at the Emirates, Arteta gave the speech an hour before kickoff, and he does these, they showed it a couple of times. He draws, like, before, like, up on the this board, like, before games, he draws, like, these little cartoon drawings, and they're, like, he's clearly not an artist, I'm not gonna, like, make fun of the guy or nothing. Well, I'm gonna make fun of the guy a little bit. He's clearly not an artist. I can't do any better either. I'm not an artist, but it's interesting to see him. So he draws a heart and a brain holding hands, and then he talks about the heart being passion and the brain being clarity, and how when you merge them together, passion and clarity, you get energy. And that's what he wants to bring out of these guys, is that you have to have that passion, that heart, that intensity, but the smarts and the clarity and the intelligent approach to it, and you have to merge them together, and that's where you get that fuel, that fire, that energy that goes and wins you games. And I thought that was just it was a good speech. I think it's something that a manager needs to do before a derby against the biggest team. So I thought that was a really cool note. And then he did something really interesting where he brings in Stuart McFarlane, who's the club photographer, to give the speech right before kickoff. And I thought this was so cool. So cool. So for those of you who don't know, McFarlane has been club photographer for 30 years. So if you think about it, that's going back to George Graham. That's going back to before Wenger, actually. Now, he's been taking pictures, so he's seen some great teams. The 98 winners, the 2002, and then of course the Invincibles. He's seen some really good teams coming in and out of this Arsenal side, of this Arsenal club. So he knows what greatness looks like. He knows what legends look like. And so he gives this really inspirational speech. And I don't want to get into too many details about it, because I can't do it justice in the way that he did. But he talks about what it's like to be a supporter, and how important it is for these fans in the stadium, for these supporters in the stadium, these match-going fans. Talks about how important it is, how much they love the club, how much they love these players, how much they love when they score, when they beat Tottenham. He talks about how important these games are, how great you need to be to win these games. And it's just, it was really cool. Really cool. I thought that was one of my favorite moments of episode 2, of course, was this speech from Stuart McFarlane. They then show the game, of course, in the 3-1 win, which was real sweet last year, wasn't it? Real sweet. 3-1 over Tottenham. At the Emirates, it was Bukayo Saka, Emile Smith-Rowe, and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Not in that order. I believe it was Smith-Rowe, Auba, and Bukayo Saka, yeah. And then, of course, Son got a late goal. And Ramsdale made a good save. Tips Lucas Moura's shot up onto the crossbar. Made a good save to prevent it from going 3-2. But yeah, so that concluded episode 2. Alright guys, in the final episode 3, that was released today as part of the All or Nothing Arsenal Edition series. Details from Aston Villa to Everton games for us last year. So it's an interesting, a lot of spicy things happened during this time. So it was an interesting episode from that perspective. It opens, of course, with the Aston Villa game. It shows our 3 goals, and then the goal that we conceded to Jacob Ramsey. By the way, looks an absolute talent. I'm really excited to see what the player does this year in the Premier League under Steven Gerrard, who seems to rate him highly. It shows his goal in the 85th minute or 82nd minute or whatever it was. And then it shows Aaron Ramsdale in the dressing room afterwards, throwing a temper tantrum, for lack of a better word, cussing, throwing things around. And I think this is an interesting look into the player and into his mentality and why we bring him in, because he's always wants to win. He always wants to perform at optimum performance, at the best of his capabilities. And he's upset not because, we won the game 3-1 and we dominated them. But we lost the clean sheet, we let in a goal. And so Ramsdale holds himself accountable for this and wants to be better. And I think that's really cool to see and good to see, and one of the reasons I love the player. Moving on from there, we talked a little bit about how Arteta sees the players as players, not as numbers. He talks about an old coach, one of the old guard in Spain, who has a famous quote that players are just numbers. And Arteta disagrees with this. And I think this is exemplified in the way there's, a little bit of an approach that they show regarding Nuno Tavares. So Arteta brings up in a conversation with the coaching staff that Nuno is uncomfortable talking about how he feels, talking about himself with both the club doctor and with the coaching staff. And Arteta is stressing how important it is for them to find alternative methods to properly communicate with Nuno. And I think this is really interesting, and it shows that Arteta does care about these players. I just like that. I like to have that sort of leadership, that sort of harmony around the squad. I don't want someone who just, is willing to cast players aside like that. Like, I like that Arteta is trying to bring everyone together, make it an us versus them, us versus the world mentality. I love that. I like that sort of thing in a manager. So I like to see that. We then see a little bit about Kieran Tierney, and I thought this was actually one of the darker, heavier things of the series so far. He talks about mental health and the mental aspects of being injured and spending so much time on the injury table. He talks about how hard and how difficult it is. So Kieran actually lives with the club chef, another Scottish guy who used to be Kieran's personal chef and then was brought on by the club. And I think this is really interesting. It shows these guys and their relationship a little bit. And one of the things they talk about is when Kieran is upset and he comes home and they both know that he's upset, is the roommate, whose name is escaping me at the moment. I think it's John. Makes Kieran some food and then leaves him alone. And that resonates with me so much. I love that. I absolutely love that. I think we all wish our roommates would just do that for us and just leave us alone, make us food, leave us alone and not talk to us. My roommate's probably out there watching this, so I love you. But yeah, it was just an interesting bit to see. But then Kieran then talks about some of the depression that comes with being injured and how difficult it is, and the coaching staff talks about how difficult it is to mentally adjust to coming back into training. When you miss training like that, you're part of your teammates, your brotherhood, and you're excluded. You're not part of them. And it sucks. I can only imagine how difficult it is with that when that's your life to miss time like that. And Kieran talks about how he's had a few friends commit suicide, and how he knows that low. He knows that how hard and difficult depression can be. And I think it's super important for these players to be able to voice these sort of difficulties and obstacles that they deal with. These are heavy, heavy things that no one should have to deal with, and players are. And it's important that these things are talked about, that they feel safe and vulnerable to talk about these sorts of things. It's really important. So I like to see that. As heavy as it was, I'm happy to see, or I'm glad that we get to see the players talk about this sort of thing openly like that. I think that's really important. And I think it has to come from someone like Kieran Tierney to get the floodgates open, because he's so assured in himself. He's so confident. He's such a leader. It's good to see him talking about mental health like this. Of course, then we had a big focus of this episode was on the Liverpool game. So there was a video released prior to the release of the series, a kind of a hype video around it, of Arteta playing "You'll Never Walk Alone" in the training grounds before the Liverpool match, before going away to Anfield. And I thought this was just an interesting way of changing up training, of changing the way you practice. And I saw online a few fans, a few supporters were ridiculing this decision. I mean, let them. There were also plenty of people who mentioning how it's interesting, how it's a new, innovative way of approaching hostile atmospheres like that. And it clearly didn't work too well. We got battered 4-0. But then we also did have a League Cup game where we went and 0-0 them in the Carabao Cup. So clearly at Anfield. So clearly it had something. And the league game against Liverpool, it was 1-0 at halftime. It was 0-0. It was all even, and it was a good game up until the 39th minute. I think so. They talked about a little bit. They showed an excerpt after the game. I think it was from Talk Sport about the Jurgen Klopp and Mikel Arteta fight on the sideline, on the pitch. And I thought that this was just a really interesting note, something I think for me that was Arteta's biggest mistake last year. You know, you can talk about his decision to let Aubameyang leave in January. You can talk about his decision to not replace Aubameyang. I'm not sure how much of that is his decision and whatnot. For me, the biggest mistake that he made in terms of management was picking a fight with Jurgen Klopp at Anfield. That's just a stupid decision. You don't do that. You're going to rile the crowd into it. That all 50,000 supporters are going to go absolutely mental and bring that energy into the game. And I just thought that was a bad decision, and it was his biggest mistake. So I'm glad that they talked about it. I wish that they would have gone more, but I don't want to, it's an Arsenal PR piece. I don't want to harp on Mikel Arteta. I don't want to go too hard on the guy. So he did come out into the dressing room and say how important it is to move on and forget about it. I think that's the right thing to say after a match like that where you lose 4-0. I think that's exactly what the players needed to hear. They looked despondent. They looked awful. Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe sitting next to each other, Gabriel, Ben White, they just looked so dejected and defeated. So I think Mikel Arteta said the right thing there. The last little bit of the episode was the United game and the Everton game, and they talked about Aubameyang getting substituted in both matches. And there's a quote from Alan Shearer and Thierry Henry, who were, of course, talking as pundits, how that might be indicative of a rift forming between Mikel Arteta and Aubameyang. Arteta, of course, denied this to the press, and this is why I can't trust anything Arteta says to the press, because he just has said things that we know are not true multiple times. And this being one of them. There was clearly a rift forming, and I think that it probably had its foundations earlier in their relationship, but I think it really started to take hold around this time, and that's when things really started to sour. Was around the time of the Everton match, which, God, that was a tough loss. That was a really tough loss, and if we had just held on and won that game, we'd be playing Champions League football. But such is life, so it goes. You can't fix the things in the past. You can only focus on what's in front of you. So yeah, I thought this was just an interesting. They show the fractures beginning to form between Arteta and Aubameyang, and I don't think that there's bad blood between the two. I think they've both probably moved on, and I think all parties involved, are a little bit better off because of the split. Alba's happy in scoring goals for Barcelona, so that's what to me. And Arsenal have then gone and signed one of Europe's elite strikers, and the club is in a really good position right now, and there's a lot of excitement and good vibes around the club at this time. So I have no issues or complaints about this souring of the relationship here. I wish Aubameyang nothing but the best. So that will wrap things up for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked, if you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. I want to see if you had anything that you disagreed with or how you felt about it. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you Friday when we take Palace on at Selhurst Park under the lights. Much love, guys. Come on, you Gunners.